Welcome to Fountain and the Flame, Adam and Will's first long session, long form session. We're just going to be asking questions, talking about sales, and see where it goes. I have Will with me, the fountain of knowledge on our team. And I have a big question for you today, Will. Whenever I talk to new salespeople, they're always bringing questions to the table. They always want to know how to do something. Um, and I've noticed that depending on the questions that they're focused on tells me a lot about how they view sales, about how they view their role, and how serious they are. You've been in sales for a long time. What is a question that when someone brings it to the table for you, you know this person is serious or you're excited to talk with them about sales?
Some of my favorites are always going to be like, hey, what didn't you know was going to be important in sales that now you value? That's always like a great question, right? So it's like basically like what was your misperception about sales, and now that you have experience, right? Like you're much more knowledgeable and so thus you'd put more value on it. I love that question because what that person is acknowledging is that they don't know everything, right? And that they have a bias already or a prejudice around what the job is going to be. And they understand that others like them have had the same thing, and that there are things that they're going to learn through their career that all of a sudden will become way more valuable once they understand them and recognize them. So I think like that is just a really deep and profound question. I love people that will, talk to me a bit about like, hey, like, you know, if there's one skill that I should be working on, what skill should what skill would that be? Those type of things are always going to be good. But the one who really is trying to understand, like, hey, like, where did your growth take you? I think like that to me is just like that's just layers deep of a question, and it shows to me like, wow, this person is thinking second order, third order effects. And so like for me, like that person's gonna, if they continue to hone that skill, they'll likely be successful.
Okay, so digging deeper beyond just what don't I know, but how did you find out what you did not know? That
Ye-
second level.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's always like really important, right? Like, I mean, but someone could be like, "Hey, what's the skill that I need to know?" And then they're like, "Well, why is that important?" I mean, that's like whatever, right? Like, but like, hey, like, walk me through, a skill that you learned later that you wish you had learned earlier that you didn't value at first, right? So something, it's interesting, right? Because that there's like so many layers to that question. It's like they're basically saying you were aware of this thing, Will, but you did not want to apply it, use it, hone it, whatever. Like it just to you was unimportant. And then you went through your sales career, your professional like life, and realized, oh my gosh, if I was just better at this thing, I would be better at my job, right? And so, what is that thing that you dismissed, basically, right? It's like what they're asking, right? Because there's only so many things you can work on when you're starting a career. And so what they're basically saying is like, all right, someone with experience, you and I have done these drafts, we've done all these things where like we shift things around, and it's like, okay, what would you have shifted around? What you like in your order of priority of things you need to work on when you first started your career? What was something near the bottom that you now would put towards the top, given experience?
Right. Well, that's why I thought it was very interesting when you and I brought in, we did a sales draft, and it was what are the qualities that we value most in a sales professional? And our drafts were not very similar. And I always think it's interesting talking to you about what do you look for, what do you try to hire, and things like that, and how it's so different for you later in your journey. You've done more hiring, you've worked with more professionals, right? I've been in this space for a little under 10 years. You've been in the space for over 20, right?
Yeah,
So I think that's really interesting. What you're mentioning right now, it's people who are looking for bigger things to work on. The people I've coached, as you say that, like it brings to my mind the people who have kind of struggled and who have done well. The people who have struggled tend to show something first. They want to show me what they've done well because they're looking
yeah,
for validation on what they
yeah,
know. And the people who I've coached who have really grown have always come with a question. They've always come with some sort of what am I missing? That's why I'm here to be coached, rather than people who are there to hear something good about themselves, to be honest. I'm curious, what is your answer to your own question? So you said that's your favorite question. What's the
yeah.
answer to it?
Preparation. Yeah, preparation. I mean, I always felt like I always like understood like asking good questions is important. Um, but I was like, honestly, I was naturally good at that when I started. I was just really good at it. Like I understood, like I remember I took a training. I took a training when I was at Best Buy, like right when we started, like, you go through whatever their corporate training. That every person, whether you're 16 or 60 or 70 or 80, goes through that week of boot camp or whatever it is. And I like, and in it, they teach you like how to like, ask questions, right? Like, and how to structure, like walking someone through to get to a sale or whatever. And I was like, I picked it up naturally. And I think I picked it up obviously naturally. I mean, I think I was always decent at it when I started my sales career at like, I don't know. Do you know what my first sales job was outside of like mowing lawns and selling those services? Have I ever told you that? It's pretty crazy.
Um, I guess not. No, I was thinking it's retail, but I'm supposing it's not.
No, no, no. Most people think like it was the butcher shop where I went to work at the butcher shop and I was the guy who sold on the counter. But actually, I had a job before that. In high school, my sophomore year, I worked at a glass shop engraving glass for the holidays. So like you would come in and you would buy your mom like a mug, and then I would write mom on it. Like I knew how to like use the little this there was like this engraving wheel, and I would engrave on it like letters or whatever else. So that was like my first sales job was selling glass engraving, right? And so what's interesting, right? Well, go ahead.
That's where the art of the sale came in. You
Yeah, that
started
was
the
a
art of the
true art,
sale.
right? So that was my first job, right? But I was really good at like initially, like I was just always like kind of like curious, like people would come in, I'm like, oh, like I started asking questions about like, well, who's the gift for? Like, why this? Why like, you know, I was gonna call it a sugar pot, but I don't like never to put your sugar in, right? Like, why not? Are they a baker? Like, I would ask these questions. They're like, no, she doesn't actually bake a lot. And I'm like, well, then I'm not sure like a sugar bowl, like, whatever is like, do they drink coffee? Like I would start asking questions and like, what about flowers? Do you love flowers? Yeah, well, yeah, I love fresh flowers. Okay, let's get her a vase, right? And like, it was just like whatever. I don't know why. I was just fine. I was good at it, right? And so like then when I got to Best Buy and take the the training and stuff, and same thing at the butcher shop. Naturally, like I remember. I always will remember this one time. This woman came in to buy a steamship roast. So steamship roast is like just a big hunk of meat, and it's like 5.5, 7 pounds, and you throw it in the oven and you make roast beef, right? But it's not like high quality meat. It's you have to cut it real thin, right? Like you have to cut it really, really thin. And she was like, oh, I need whatever. And I just started asking her. I was like, well, like, who's coming to dinner? And she was like, oh, my husband's boss and his wife. And I was like, okay, like, well, let me, like, what type of, like, does your husband like him? Like, why is he coming to dinner? Like, I was asking questions, and, inevitably I figured, okay, like, no, like, she wants something easy to cook so that she can't mess up, right? And this is what she's used to buying, but this is not the experience she wants to deliver, right? And so, I ended up selling her something else. And so like, yeah, always good at asking questions. Get to Best Buy, same thing. You know, I was like, hey, like digital cameras were like being sold at the time. And it's like, oh, okay, like, it's Christmas time. It's like, oh, who's the camera for? Oh, it's like, oh, it's for my mom. Great. Do you think she's gonna open it that day? Do you guys open presents in front of each other? Yeah. Do you think she's gonna open it? Yeah. Do you think she's gonna want to use it? Yeah. Okay. Well, this doesn't have batteries, so let me get you some batteries. Also, doesn't have a memory card, right? So like, she can take pictures, but it's not gonna go anywhere. Like, let me get you a memory card, right? And so like, I was just really good at like doing this stuff. So I just like instinctually knew asking questions was something that was important, but I like whatever. Like I just that wasn't that's something like that I didn't know if you could work on. I just figured people were either good or bad at it, right? But the one thing that I did know that you could work on um and be better at, but I dismissed was preparation.
Right.
Like I just felt like, hey, I can ask good questions. I have some level of charisma. I'm interesting to talk to a lot of the time, not all the time, but I'm fairly interesting to talk to.
Depends on the day.
Yeah, yeah, I'm adept at going back and forth and understanding like a conversation and whatever else, right? And so like that's just going to be more than enough to get me far.
What was that moment for you? What was that moment where you recognized my preparation's not good enough and it can be better?
I was pitching Gap
Yep.
and um was pitching Gap, and I had some executives in the room with me, and I had no clue what was important to them. None. I actually had no clue, like literally what they really did. Like I just showed up.
Right.
Um, and I was just like, yeah, like this is gonna be easy. We're gonna have a conversation, whatever, right? I didn't know much about them and what they valued, so the pitch was pretty standard. Um, my deck was pretty standard. Um, and yeah, I mean, it didn't resonate, right? Like it just didn't resonate. So that was like kind of like the first moment. Then the second moment, it was funny because it's like you don't even learn these lessons. You're just kind of like, oh, okay. So I learned like there, I was like, oh, I should know the people that are going to be in the room. I should have a better understand what's going to be important to them. Like, la da da da. Okay, I learned that. Then I was working at another SaaS company, and I had booked a meeting in New York, and I was bringing along my CEO and my CTO and myself. We were going up there, um, and we show up. I gave them dossiers, who's going to be in the room,
Right.
like every like detail about every interview these executives have done that like I could
You're
find.
thinking you killed it now. You're prepped.
Yeah. I forgot to ask the person hosting what type of connections were going to be in the room that we were presenting in. So we get to the room and there's like no like projector, no TV, right? And then they scramble to get one, but I don't have the
The
connections.
Best Buy guy didn't ask about the tech.
No, didn't ask about the tech. Then so we spent, you know, 30 minutes as I scrambled around, like, they kind of know a little bit about the deal, right? They're just whatever. They were more like there to answer like more in-depth questions and whatever.
Right.
There was like two people that really had conversation. That was me and my point of contact, my champion, and my champion, like obviously is like now embarrassed. He's got people in the room. They're wanting to leave, right? Like there's just like, and that was like the moment where I was like, okay, like there's like deal preparation and then there's deal preparation, right?
Right.
Like, and then there's like, run of shows type stuff, right? And that was like the moment I was just like, like I killed it. I killed it in the prep. Like we had the amazing use case, really understood their business, understood where we were going to sit, like really like understood the tech stack and where we were going to fit in and like how we were going to help, understood all of this stuff, understood the people in the room. Like I knew the objections, the likely objections, the questions that they would have, all of that stuff. And then the most basic thing, which is like, how do I plug in to show them what I got?
Right.
I didn't take care of.
It's like getting to the Zoom meeting and you don't realize that you have a 5 minute update, so you're gonna show up 5 minutes late to a meeting with the CEO.
Yeah, I mean, listen, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Or you just don't check, like you don't check to see what's behind you on the walls, right? I've done interviews for people where interviewed them for jobs and like literally like their husband's underwear is in the background. I did a coaching call. This is funny. I mean, this is nothing to do with preparation. I did a coaching call with a CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. Just like
Bold tie.
they had a spec yeah, multi-billion. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So specific, like someone in my network, like so I was like, oh, you should talk to Will. He's got some pretty like interesting insights about this
Right.
stuff. Like, it's worth 30 minutes with him. All right. So we did a call. Um, and it was like 6 p.m. here, and they were in Paris. So what is that? 11, 10, 11 in, 11 in Paris?
Depends on if it's
11.
daylight.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So we're on Zoom. So we get on Zoom. They were like, hey, we have a dinner, whatever else. They were like, what happened? And um, her husband, her husband's in the background, just walking around naked.
Oh no.
So like that's preparation. But my point is like,
It's Parisian.
sometimes when you're like, preparation. That person doesn't care, right? That person's like, whatever. She was like, oh my God, like, hey, like Bobby, put some clothes on. Like they're not embarrassed, right? Like whatever. Like they've been successful. They've had a successful career. Like whatever it is, right? Not a big
That's
deal.
funny.
But like, yeah, like yeah, your preparation. Like you just don't even think about those little things, right? Like those little things that people are like thinking about and judging And then for me in the sales side of it, right? Like, and I know I've been rambling on, but preparation was just one of those things where I was like, oh, okay. And then it was like, oh, okay, I need to prepare by understanding the business and understanding the people,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, well, it's like the small details ahead of time in that particular deal, right? That like, and even now, sometimes I run into it. The people we train run into it. We get so accustomed to Zoom or whatever,
Yeah.
and then we're selling to someone, and they their company does not allow them to access Zoom,
Yeah.
right? And now you're scrambling to find the platform,
Right.
and it's like, it's like, yeah. I mean, I still fail at that sometimes. Sometimes I'm just like, man, how could I forget that? Like,
Right.
like because now I feel like the world is on Zoom. So all these things are preparation, like no matter at what stage you're at in your career, like checklist preparation, like all of these little things like really are important and matter
Yeah.
as much as anything else.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned, right, all the things that you needed to improve on and the way that you found it. So many people think that it's just going to be found, right, in some way or another, and it's not the case. You found that because you then reflected on it after, and I feel like that's why coaching is so important, right? You are able to coach someone who now doesn't need to go through that failure if they're attentive to learning, and you can go through these
Yeah.
things.
Well, and also, by the way, I mean, I'm gonna pat myself a little bit on the back here. I was coachable too, right? At the Gap meeting, the my champion who was a senior executive, I was like, that's embarrassing, dude. He's like, I'm gonna get you another shot. I'm gonna get you another meeting with these people. That's embarrassing, but you can't show up that way again,
Right.
right? Like, and uh, the other one, the one in New York, they weren't as kind. They like literally screamed at me like the whole ride back. Like, not screamed. First they screamed, and then they like, calmly yelled, and then they kind of like ignored me for about like, for about an hour, and then they got back into it. And then as we walked to our cars, they again like, dressed me down about.
My soccer coach in high school called it passionate speaking.
Yeah, yeah. And so but like I listened, right? I listened and was like, okay, it's never gonna happen
Right.
again. Started putting a process together. A process that we just executed on recently. Like we just went to three of us went to train, do multiple trainings at an organization a couple days ago. And Mike Villat from the team, from my team, from our team, sent an email out, was like, hey, Wi-Fi information, what are the type of connections in the room? What's the room we're gonna be in? Like, can we project? Da da da. How's the seating arrangement? What's the dress code?
Right. Of the space.
Like, yeah, how do you want us dressed? How's your team gonna show up? Like, how do you want us to, like, because that's important. Like, we deal with all sorts of customers, and I've shown up a long time ago, like in like a shirt, tie, sweater, whatever. No, a shirt, tie, and sweater, right? And like everyone is in there is like totally like, chill. And it's like, yeah, it's just like they're like, what the hell? And then I've had the reverse, then I've gone too casual and someone's like, then you're like, oh my God. Like, right. So now it's a good question to ask. But anyway, so you asked, right? So that's gonna be it, right? It's gonna be like that was probably the thing I literally thought sales was all art.
Right. Yeah.
And I just literally, and like I just preparation
That process.
knowledge didn't matter as much. Yeah.
It's so funny. I'm so opposite of you in that sense. Where for me, the beforehand, I've always been very big on prep. Like I'm in my sister's room right now, and I took down the Los Angeles Angels cap that was on this bookshelf right here because I won't have it. I won't stand for it. I'm a Yankees fan.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm not recording
Yeah.
with it. Whereas one thing that you are so good at, and I wonder if this is natural for you or not, but since I've worked with you for many years now, you're very organized and schedule, right? We had last week, we got out of our schedule for a second, and you're like, I need my schedule. My schedule is my schedule. And I'm the opposite, where I'm noticing that I'm so good at being flexible, and that was a strength for me for a while in work because people would say, can you do this? And I would get it done, get it done, get it done. That now, as I'm getting into bigger projects, that's a thing that I'm working very big on is okay, now how can I be organized as I have a project that is now going to take me most likely 2 years to scale up and do a really, really good job on. How do I make sure I keep myself organized? And so it's like I'm the opposite. I've always been good at prep and flexibility, and that organization's not there, right? And for me, it hasn't necessarily been a failing because I've been lucky to have someone, right, who I can recognize other things, and like you're really good at that, and I see that. I'm like, I'm not, right? And that's why I think when you mention these things, you had people who coached you, you're coachable. It's like we can fail and figure things out, or we can have coaches and figure things out. And it's really those two things, like who is in your space and your circle that's helping you figure out your strengths, whether it's reflection or not.
Yeah, man. I mean, listen, I tell people like all the time, and as is this is like, like the reason I'm so open about the failures is because failures suck. And you're going to experience your own anyway. So don't experience the ones I've already experienced. It's like, go find new failures and teach me about those, before I've gotten it right. And it's like, yeah, I mean, listen, there's just like, that is a massive part of all of this, from a coaching perspective. Like, one of the big things, and you talk about it, like for me was like, okay, like when I meet people that remind me of a young me, like my alarm bells just start going off. And it's like, okay, I need to dig in to understand like just like how much of this is real and how much of this is just like, some sort of magic show. They just got a personality,
Right.
they just some natural like, you know, because like it's really, really difficult to like, have continued success in this field if that's all you're relying on is like personality and no process. It's just going to be really hard.
It's funny when I came into this organization, everyone mentioned you're so similar to Will, and then when I first was with Maestro, a lot of the compliments I got, I took note of, and it was usually natural things, right? Oh, Adam, you're very smart. You pick things up really quick. You're very charismatic, and I was thinking about you, right? The man at the Maestro group, and I was like, what are the things I admire about Will? And it's kind of the opposite. It's the intangibles that you've built, and so for me, like I've recognized that we are similar. What are you doing that I'm not doing? And I was like, oh, it's all of this process. It's all of this organization that you stick to these things, and so you get things done repeatedly rather than just these things. So like my goal right now for my next 2 years is when people begin to compliment me, I really want it to start to be more of those intangibles that I can create rather than just what I've kind of had more naturally.
I mean, listen, it's like the handsome man with a pretty woman, right? That like wants to be recognized for how intelligent they are.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, right? Like, no, I mean, like, there's like you didn't do anything to become charismatic. It's DNA, right? Like,
Thanks, mom.
like, yeah, no, you know what I'm saying? Like, you didn't like. I mean, maybe a little bit you cultivated it, but overall, like
No,
that's,
I agree.
I look at like my son, and you were watching videos of him when he was 4 and 5. He's 13 now. I was watching videos of him when he was 4 and 5, right? And he's like telling stories, making up songs and jokes that like honestly, yeah, he's my son, but like I'm watching, I'm like, well, that's pretty funny, man. That's some good timing. That's whatever. But like that's not like, that's it's not like we were teaching him to do those things, right? That's like innately like some DNA, right? Like he just knows how to tell a good story. Like he knows, he's picked up on some of that
Yeah.
stuff, right? Like whatever. But like, um, you know, and so complimenting someone like on those type of things, like, and I get it, like for you is like, okay, that's great. I appreciate that. I appreciate that you recognize the things that have been given to me, God given to me, whatever you want to believe, right? Just given to me that are part of like, just my genetic code. But I want to be recognized for the things that like I worked on to achieve, that I worked on to get better at, right? Like that and even if it is taking something that I was very good at and then becoming excellent at it, right?
Yeah.
Like that to me is like that's effort, right? Like that's okay. You're recognizing the fact that I didn't rest on my laurels, that I was like, okay, yes, I'm better than most at this, but I want to be I want to work towards being the best at it, right?
Right.
Like there's something to be said for all of that. But you know, to go back to everything, like so to recap, like at the end of all of this, right? Yes, like it's process is all of that, but like it all comes from like preparation to me, right? Like if it's one thing I tell anyone is like learn to study, learn to prepare for what you're about to do.
Yeah.
Like that's a skill that like translates everywhere in life.
Yeah. I think again the people I've seen coached, the difference is the people who recognize what are you naturally good at and how can you maximize that potential, And then how do you work to get everything else that you're not naturally good at, and what work are you putting in, right? We talk about the 40-20 rule, and I feel like that 20 really should be most of that. What do you really need to bolster? And usually it's not where you're naturally good at. You can maximize that and then build everything up, and that's how you create consistency and balance rather than being so one-sided. Even someone like a NBA player, right? They're naturally so gifted. They're not going and being good at music, right? But they're figuring out in that space, what do I need to work on? My jump shot needs to get better. And in that space, they're still targeting a weakness and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I will say though, one thing that I'm a firm believer in, right, is that there are certain weaknesses that like it's not that like you ignore them, but you don't spend a lot of time like getting better at them because you're just not going to be able to, right? So like to your example, you know, I'm thinking, Jason Kidd was an incredible dribbler and became a pretty good mid-range shooter and okay three over time, but it took a long time to be there, right, to get there. But he had mastered the art of running an offense at that point. He had mastered the art of
Mm-hmm.
setting his teammates up because, first years of his career, I mean, he's horrible, and then he was like, okay, I've mastered that part. Now I can spend more time on this other stuff and get better. Yes, and so like there is a little bit of that, but like I do think sometimes like people work on like can be working on the wrong
Yeah.
things, thinking that they're gonna like you know eh, where in reality, hey, you're pretty good at asking questions, right? So like maybe get excellent at that, right? And you're not as good at I'm trying to think. You're not as good as at relaying information in the pipeline meeting,
Right.
right? Like, okay, like I would coach that person and be like, hey, listen, just get so excellent at like answering questions that your like deals move really quickly, and then who cares how good you are?
Right.
But you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
there's just certain things that matter and stuff like that. I will tell you, you know what's interesting? We're at 27 and a half minutes. It doesn't feel like we've been talking for 27 and a half minutes.
No, no. The thing is, all of this is so relevant. I have like 8 questions that I've been holding because you've been giving good stuff. So I was like, let me not cut Will off. We could talk about this for 6 hours and still not have even cut into the surface. Because other things that I'm thinking about right now, as we're talking about, is like, how do you figure out what to work on then? How do you figure out what to be studying, right? One thing I noticed that people do all the time when they're trying to get better at something is try and get better at everything at once. And that's why what you just said really resonated with me. I think when I was a younger professional, I was like, I'm not really, really great at keeping a schedule and I need to fix this and this and that. And I had like 5 things. And when I tried to do them all, I was just spread too thin to get good at any of them. And I got okay at more stuff. Instead of, like you mentioned, what's one thing I need to focus on right now? You know?
Yeah, and like what's gonna have the biggest impact, right? So it's like, hey, like if I'm always if I'm really bad at follow-up because I'm really bad at time management, then like you shouldn't be focused on like how do I get better at follow-up? You should focus on like how do I get better at time management,
Right.
right? Like, and I think that's where like most people like, just don't do a very good job of assessing like really what's the root cause here? Like what is causing these less than stellar
Right.
outcomes for these particular tasks or whatever it is, and like, you know, and if I work on that, does it affect other things, right? So like that's a good example. That's where like, okay, like if I get better at time management, then I probably get better at preparation. I probably get better at follow-up. I probably get better at preparation for my pipeline meeting. Like there's all of these things, right? Because like if I'm always scrambling and never have time for anything, right? And it's like, oh, I'm just gonna work on what I'm going to do is I'm just gonna block off 30 minutes to do my follow-up, right? And it's like, okay, that's good. That's the beginnings of time management, but like shouldn't we really think about like how you're assessing the things that you find important? Um, and that's why coach matters, by the way. That's why coach
I
matters.
agree because again, 3 more things just popped up that we could talk about for another 30 minutes. How do you identify what the root cause is? How do you figure out what's going to be a short-term gain versus a long-term gain? A lot of people that I work with, again, younger professionals and even some older who would really value from recognizing this is they focus on the short term too quickly. I need to do this rather than if they actually did something else 6 months down the line, they'd be 10 times better rather than focusing on 1 month down the line, right? That's another thing we could talk about for 6 more hours on here.
Yeah, I mean the key is like taking a is taking just some like looking at like how therapists do it, right? So like, it's not like
Good
It's not like
therapists.
they're like, here's my problem, here's your solution. Yeah, it's not like here's my problem, here's your solution, right? It's like you got to dig in, and that's why like I actually think like, and it doesn't matter whether the coach is an official coach, right? Like someone that you're paying. It could be a mentor, it could be a buddy, right? Where you're like, hey, like, I want to have a session where I'm going to talk through like some of the stuff, and I just want you to question the decisions that I'm making around how I'm trying to improve myself. Like this is a really simple way to do
Yeah.
this, right? So you go to a colleague and you're like, oh, hey, listen, like let's go to lunch. I want you to just ask me questions to help me think. And literally what you're asking for is a thinking partner, right? Like, why would you work on that? Like, why is that important? What is that gonna like? Because often we don't think our way through all of those things. I mean, I will tell you the most like popular question that I have, the most not popular, the question I ask the most probably when I'm coaching CEOs is like, what are we solving for?
Yeah, what do we want to accomplish in this time versus just making ourselves feel good or talk about stuff so we're like, great, I worked today.
Yeah, I mean, even though they're like, oh, should we do this? Should we do this? Should we do this? And I'm like, what are we solving for? Like, what is the actual problem we're solving here?
Right. Cool. As we wrap up, if you have a coach, if you don't have a coach, grab a buddy. Talk about figuring out weaknesses, long-term gains. Talk about what don't you know? What did that person not know and figure out, right? And everything else that we've kind of touched the surface today on. Go find someone to just talk about it. Find a buddy, find a coach, just someone to talk through all of these things. And if you don't have someone, email me or Will, adam@maestrogroup.com. I'll talk to anyone just about these things. I'll do it for 5 hours. I do it with Will for 30 minutes, and that's enough for me.